Welcome to Highline BI 348 class video number 2. Hey, if you want to download this file, BI 348 Chapter 7 Start, or any of the other files that go along with this chapter, click on the link below the video. Hey, in this video, we want to talk about good spreadsheet model building. Now, really what we're going to do is we're going to build a what-if model where we have inputs. We change the inputs and all the formulas and charts and output changes. Now here's a set of rules. Our textbooks has a similar set of rules, but here we go. Excel's golden rule. That's the #1 rule for good spreadsheet model building. Now, in all the prerequisites class, we always talked about it, and it's very simple. It even goes back to the original epiphany of Bricklin and Frankston's, the guys who invented the spreadsheet. And here it is. If a formula input, and we can use the word formula input, the book uses parameter, I use assumptions and variables, but those are all of our formula inputs. If they can change, put it in a cell and refer to it in the formula with the cell reference. And always label all your formula inputs. Now, there's been research done on this topic. The #1 error in spreadsheets throughout history is when people do not follow Excel's golden rule. You cannot type a number or a formula input into a formula if it's going to change. Now, rule number 3, separate the formula input area from the model area. And we will separate it and always use red for our label for formula input and blue for our model area. The model is where you create your formulas and where you put your decision variable. Now, this decision variable will come up a few times in this class. You don't have to put the decision variable in the model area because it is a clear, important formula input. You can put it up into the formula input area. But to follow along with the way this textbook works, I'm going to put the decision variable in the model area. But it will clearly be labeled and formatted as a formula input. We want to, in the model area, always label all elements in the model area. That means all of the formulas, not just a cell with the formula, but a label next to it. And then if we have our decision variable. So everything will be labeled. We also, when we're building good spreadsheets, we want to use appropriate number and stylistic formatting to make spreadsheets easy to understand. And we talked about this one so much in all the prerequisite classes. And it is number formatting is a facade. If we don't understand that number formatting, like currency, is a facade, that $ isn't in the cell. It's just sitting on the surface. When we're dealing with dates, it's not an actual date. It's a serial number underneath. All of those topics we've covered in prerequisite class. And as for stylistic formatting, we have 2 schools of thought. There's the minimalist school of thought, where you add bold to your field names and important items, but the rest is pretty much left as gray lines you would see in a spreadsheet. I don't follow that minimalistic rule, and I will show you the formatting that I'll use, and it's exactly consistent with all of the previous classes. Number 7, we want to keep the default alignments to visually portray data type. Numbers are always aligned to the right. Text is always aligned to the left. And we will get into trouble with that in this class when we import data. But in general, we want to leave the default alignment. A big mistake you see in spreadsheets throughout the world is people use center a lot. And really, if you're trying to track down errors, that is a deterrent. So our default alignments are always helpful because they tell us what kind of data it is. Number 8, name all sheets and files smartly. Sometimes we have sheet references or file workbook references, and if you don't name those things smartly, not only are your formulas hard to understand, but in terms of navigating, like navigating through a workbook, if you don't have smart names, then it's hard to figure out where to go and get things done. And number 9, sometimes it's helpful to create math formulas and influence diagrams to describe your model. That is something In some of my classes, we look at the math formulas, but we haven't done an influence diagram, and we'll look at that in our video today. Now, we want to go over to fixed cost, variable cost analysis sheet and click on this. And here is a description of our entire huge problem we're going to try and solve throughout this chapter. We have a bunch of topics. And many of the problems in this class will be like this. They'll be long, descriptive, and it's going to take us a long time to complete our task. Now let's go ahead and read this. The Boomerang Company, JL Boomerangs, makes boomerangs. Actually, that's a company that I used to run. So I tend to use these examples because I'm familiar with them. The 4-on freestyle boomerang, the quad, has a fixed cost of $17,430. Fixed cost means all of the machines and costs that do not vary by quantity. Hey, by the way, there's a picture of the quad. It's an awesome freestyle boomerang, and it's one of the more labor-intensive boomerangs to make because the leading edge and trailing edge of each one of these has to be exactly perfect and done by hand. Although we have equipment, routers, and bandsaws and all that kind of stuff to do the base, the last little touches are done by a highly trained professional boomerang maker. So the actual cost of manufacturing this boomerang is a lot more than most. Hey, so we have fixed costs of $17,430, and here's the variable cost. We've already had a cost accountant determine all of these. The material cost per unit, so for one boomerang, is $4.30, and that's everything. That is the wood, the paint, the sealer, the sandpaper, all of the things that change as you create each boomerang. Assigned indirect costs, that's the cost accountant trying to figure out costs that are absorbed by this boomerang in the process but are not actually obviously connected to the boomerang. That's $1.15. And then labor per unit is $4.17. So if we add up all of those, we'll get our total variable cost per unit. In addition, the wholesale price revenue that is charged is $16.50. That means when we sell it to another business to resell it, they pay $16.50, and then the retail on this is like $30 to $40. And it's assumed the percentage of boomerangs made that are defective and cannot be sold is 2%. So we get all the way to the end with all of these costs, but for whatever reason, 2% of them cannot be sold. The goal for this video is to calculate total profit. We're going to create a model that will calculate total profit if the number of units are 2,000. We'll create the model with math formulas and an influence diagram. And then the rest of these are what we'll do in some of the other videos, things like goal seek, data tables, which are totally amazing, and charts. Now we're going to go ahead and insert a new sheet. I'm actually going to click on this calculate revenue, so the sheet goes right there. And you could right-click insert, but I'm going to use the keyboard Shift F11, and there's our sheet. We're going to double-click. And I called it quad, fixed cost, variable cost, profit, and enter. Now I'm going to start right at the top, and we're going to follow our rules. We're going to type formula inputs, and then I'm going to put in parentheses parameters, assumption, and variables. Those are all synonyms for our formula inputs. Now I'm very carefully going to highlight, and I'm always going to, on the home ribbon, use fill of red and font color of white and a border outline. And that's always consistently. I always use that. That way, anytime I open up any spreadsheet and see this color red, I know these are the formula inputs. Now we need to read through that problem and just list our information and formula inputs. And I'm going to change the column width because I'm going to have some big labels here. Now I'm also going to list some information like about the company and whatnot. Our first formula input is going to be fixed costs, and I'm going to say fixed costs equals FC. And the reason why is I'm going to define the formula inputs with variables, either single or two-letter variables, so we can create our math formulas and influence diagram later. Tab, and the amount is $17,430, and enter. Now I'll come back and add some number formatting for these dollar amounts later. Our next formula input variable is going to be material cost per unit. I'm going to say equals MC tab 4.3, enter. Assign indirect costs equals IC tab, and that's going to be $1.15. Enter. Labor cost per unit equals LC tab, and that's $4.17. And I can already see up here this is assigned indirect costs per unit. Equal sign, and I can see tab that's hanging over, and so I want to change the column width. Revenue equals, and we'll say R for that tab, and this is going to be 16.5, and enter. Now, these are the dollar amounts, so I'm going to highlight these. Control 1 to open up format cells. Tab to get down to here, and then arrow, or just use your mouse. Currency, I'm going to select 2 decimals and the negative sign. That's OK. Click OK or hit Enter. I'm going to capitalize this right here. Now we have more information. Percentage of boomerangs made that are defective and cannot be sold equals D. Tab, that one's hanging way over. I'm going to change this. And this is going to be 0.02, Control Enter, and I will add percentage number formatting. You know, I could have typed that. Watch this. 2.00, and as soon as I add the percentage symbol, that tells Excel to do number formatting as I'm typing. The whole number 2 is not going into the cell. When I enter that, the number that went underneath the number formatting is 0.02. 2 parts out of 100. 2 divided by 100. That's just a percentage number formatting displaying it on the surface of the spreadsheet. Now, I want to also be careful. Notice I have some formula inputs in my formula input area, but I also have some general information. I also want to always say what my goal is here in my goal. The problem tells you if you're building your own model from scratch, you have to decide that from the outset. And the goal is to calculate total profit. Now, I'm going to leave some room here because I'm going to come back later when we build our data table and add some other formula inputs. I don't know exactly how many. I'm going to, right here, I can see down in the status bar it says 175. Zoom, I'm going to hold Control and roll the wheel on my mouse to zoom out. Now I'm going to come down here, maybe here later, maybe let's see, 16. I'm going to add some things there, but now I want to put my math formulas. And really, these are not totally necessary. Control Enter, Control B. However, when we're building a model, especially a complex model, which we did a little bit in 218 and 210, it's helpful to show explicitly our calculations. Not only that, but down in our model area, we will also refer to these actual math formulas. So there'll be a label that shows exactly what the calculation is. Now, our first formula we're going to calculate is variable cost per unit. So I type variable cost per unit and equal sign because we're going to assign 2 letters, variable cost. Now, how do we calculate that? Well, if we look up here, it would simply be MC plus IC plus LC, and Enter. Now, before we can calculate total variable cost, we need to define our quantity or units variable. And I'm actually going to put that down in the model area. And I'm not quite sure, again, where exactly it is. I'm just going to start down here. Again, we can delete rows or add rows as we need them. But here I'm going to type something like model, calculate total profit based on quantity. And I'm going to highlight the same number of cells as above, and that was all the way to the F column. So now I've done that. I'm going to hold Shift and click an F. And now I'm going to use a different color. I'm going to use this blue. Now, this blue isn't up in your palette. This palette is determined by your theme, so more colors. And in fact, the color I'm going to use for our model is always this blue. And the color I'm always going to use for formulas is in here. And we'll come back and look at that later. I'm going to click that one, click OK. Something like, no, I'm going to use white font and then border all the way around. Now, right down below, our first thing I'm going to say, I put some synonyms here. Production volume, units, that's usually what I say. Quantity, that's what the textbook says. And we're going to define this as little q. tab, and our original problem says, hey, we're going to start with 2,000, right? If we're doing what if analysis, that's our starting point. We'll do some analysis based on that, but then we'll also do some analysis where we change this. I'm going to click over here and type decision variable, Control B, and I'm going to right click and go to my little mini toolbar, which I should have been doing all the way along, and we can get to some basic formatting things from there. So I'm going to say decision variable 2000. Control 1 to open up format cells. I'm going to say number, use a comma, and I definitely do not want any decimals when I'm talking about whole numbers for units. Click OK. So now there we've defined our Q. Now we can come up and define total variable cost, and I'm going to say total VC. And it's a function of Q. So I'm going to, just like we did in math with f of x, I'm going to do open parentheses Q, close parentheses. So it's just saying with our notation that the total variable cost is going to depend on Q. Now, what is this formula here? It's going to be, hey, variable cost times our Q. Enter. We have already defined fixed cost. It's an input. We don't have to make any calculations. So we can calculate total cost. And that'll be equal to TC as a function of Q, our decision variable. So the total cost will equal fixed cost plus TVC as a function of Q. And so there's our total cost. Now we need total revenue also. And notice up here we defined our R. So total revenue, hey, TR as a function of Q will simply equal R times little q. Now right there, that's if we don't have any defects. But up here, 2%. So instead of multiplying R times Q times 100%, we have to take 100% and subtract 2%. So times, and then in parentheses, 1 minus RD for defective rate, close parentheses. And so that's our formula for total revenue. Now we can calculate total profit. Hey, TP, open parentheses, Q, and that's equal to, hey, the two little bits we just calculated, TC as a function of Q plus TR as a function of Q, and enter. So there's our formulas. Now we have another formula we'll come back and add here later when we do break-even analysis. But now we can look, and I'm going to control and roll my wheel. It looks like I have all of my formula inputs, which includes this Q down here and all of our formulas. Now we want to talk about an influence diagram that will illustrate where our formula inputs are and our formulas, and show how everything flows into our final calculation, total profit. Now, I'm going to show you how to do this with inserted shapes in Excel. You are welcome to do it on a piece of paper if you want, or in this case, I'm going to start with insert. And over here, now my ribbon is kind of squished down. There's this shape, so you'll have to find it. And there's a bunch of shapes. And what we're going to do is we'll make the first one shape as a particular size, and then we'll copy and paste it many times. Now I'm going to start with variable cost per unit. I'm going to come down here to flow chart. I'm going to select this circle right here, and when I click, my cursor turns to that little really thin crosshair, and I can actually click and drag to create a particular shape. And I'm going to start with a shape about that big. Now you can format these however you want. I'm going to select the outside edge and Control 1. In 2013, we get these task panes for objects. I'm going to say fill. We're already on this. Sometimes you end up over here and you have to click back to your bucket. I'm going to say solid fill, and I'm going to come down here. I'm actually going to use a solid fill of white. All right, so now we have this. I want to copy this, so I'm going to click on the outside edge and Control C. I'm going to drag this over, close this. And I'm going to come down below and Control V, Control V, Control V. And the reason I have 3 of them is because there are 3 inputs for our first formula here, variable cost per units. Now watch this. We could click inside here, right click, edit text, but I am going to link every single one of these to our actual math formulas or our formula inputs. And the way I'm going to do this, in earlier classes, you've seen when we created chart labels and titles, we could link them to cells. The same thing happens here. If I have the outside selected, I can come up to the formula bar, type an equal sign, and click on the cell. As soon as I hit enter, there it is. So I'm going to click and drag this a little bit wider, something like that. Now I don't want to do the same thing. I'm going to click on this one, click up in the formula bar, equal sign, and this is material cost per unit, and enter. Click on the next one, equal sign, and we have assigned indirect cost per unit. Click on the third one, formula bar, equal sign, labor costs. Now I can see that these are not all showing up exactly. So I'm going to move amongst them. 3 formula inputs that go all into determining this. Now I'm going to go back up to Shapes, Insert, this little one right here. And on this arrow, I'm going to try and double click, which doesn't always work. Or you can right click and it says Lock Drawing Mode. Now I want to come down and click on down here. I had to actually turn that ribbon off. And now if I point to one of these edges here and I click, it's now connected there. And when I point up to this formula, when I click and let go, now there's an arrow. Now I'm going to point, and because I'm in locked mode, I can click and drag. When I'm in lock mode, I can click on that little dot. And when I see a corresponding dot up here, now I have, and I'm going to click Escape. You can see the cursor's little thin crosshair. If I click Escape, it reverts back to my selection cursor. So the idea here is that now we have these 3 formula inputs with arrows pointing to an actual formula. And when we're finished, the entire diagram will be arrows pointing towards formulas. Now remember, this variable cost per unit is going to end up in another formula right here. So actually from this formula will be an arrow to another formula. When we're done, only the items that don't have any arrows pointing in, those will be formula inputs. Everything else will be our formulas. Now, we don't have any other objects on this sheet, so I'm going to show you a trick here. Instead of clicking, holding the Control key to try and select them, I'm going to use the F5 key. That's the Go To dialog box. And then I'm going to click on Special. And down here, Go To means you can highlight everything that's a particular thing. I'm going to select Objects and click OK. And instantly, they're all highlighted. Now I can click and drag if I want. So I clicked and drag. Now I want to click outside to deselect those. Now our next formula is going to be total variable costs. I'm actually going to do a trick here. I'm going to Control C and then click somewhere up here and Control V. If I click and go up to the formula bar, I can actually highlight that cell reference. And when I click on the 18, instantly it's updated when I hit Enter. So now we have total variable costs. Now for this one, if you look down here, we have 2 inputs. This formula here, VC, and our Q. So I'm going to click off to the side and Control V and define this one as highlighting the cell reference. And this is going to be our decision variable down here. I can see that A25. So when I hit Enter, there's our production volume units quantity Q. So now these 2 go as inputs into total variable costs. This one will also go into the revenue formula, for example. So I'm going to go back up to Insert. And on the lines, right-click Lock. And now I'm going to click down here to close that. Point to one of the dots on my VC. Click and drag. There's one arrow. Come over to Q. And I'm actually going to click on this dot here and then click and drag, and boom. So now we start to see, and I'm going to turn that cursor off with Escape. We start to see our influence diagram emerge. Total costs are next. I'm simply going to click on the outside edge, Control C, click somewhere up here and Control V. come up to the formula bar, highlight that, and this one is going to be our total costs formula. So I see A19. When I hit enter, this updates. Now we have fixed costs, so I'm going to need another circle or node out here, Control V. And we can adjust these later however we like, but it's looking OK so far. I'm going to click, come up to the formula bar, highlight that A18, and this one is simply fixed costs. I have my A4. Now I'm looking over here. When I hit enter, instantly I have. But now we need our arrow, so go up to Insert, drop down, right click, lock. Click over here to close that ribbon. I see my fixed cost, click and drag. I see my variable cost, click and drag. And so now, escape to turn this cursor off. Now I'm back to my selection cursor. Now see down here, these are flowing into here. Both of these are flowing into total variable costs, and now fixed costs and total variable costs are flowing into total costs. Now we're going to need our total revenue, and total revenue will be dependent on R and this production volume. So I'm going to click on one of these, Control C. Somewhere here, Control V, Control V. All right, now this one will be our total revenue. So I have the A19 highlighted. I'm going to come down to my total revenue. I see that A20 when I hit enter. There we have our total revenue. Now it looks like we're going to have R. There's the Q. There's the can be R, but we're also going to need D. So I'm going to click here, Control C, Control V. Now for this one, I'm going to come up to the formula bar, highlight the A19. And this one is going to be, wow, when I click on that, it's A9 and hit enter. That's going to be a long one. I'm going to actually move these. So we'll keep that one over there. I'm not quite sure how I'll size this one. Oh, there it is, almost. There, it looks like we have percentage of boomerangs made that are defective and cannot be sold, D. This one right here, highlight that A19, and now I'm going to click on revenue R. And enter. Oh, I see my A8 and enter. So we're going to connect all these, and then we will adjust them so that it makes sense. But now we need 1, 2, 3 arrows all flowing into total revenue. Insert, shapes, come up to lines, right click, lock. Click there to turn that off. I'll click on the top one and point to that dot. The revenue, point to that dot right there, and production volume, and point to that dot right there. Now I'm going to click escape to turn that cursor off. Looking pretty good. We have one last formula above these. So I'm going to do our little trick to highlight all the objects. F5, which is go to special objects, click OK, and instantly they're all highlighted. Now I can click and drag on one of these and drag down, and they all move. Later we'll see how to group once we're done. Now we have one last node or circle to put at the top. So I'm going to just copy one of these, Control V, and this one will be highlight up in the formula bar, and I'm clicking on my total profit and enter. Now I have my two arrows I'm going to need to connect. Insert, shapes, right click, lock. Click to turn that off. Now I'm going to click on this dot right here and point right at the edge. Then click on this dot and point right to another circle. And there we have our influence diagram. Escape to turn that cursor off. I'm going to control and roll. Do that trick, F5, special, objects, click OK, and I'm going to try and drag it off to the side. And then scroll over, control and roll my wheel. Now, maybe we'll make this a little bit neater. Put this one up here. Revenue right there. And there we have an influence diagram. Hey, F5, special, objects, click OK. Right click. Now I'm going to right click either with my mouse, or I'm going to use the right click key on the keyboard. Remember, the right click key on the keyboard right clicks the thing that is highlighted. So of course, up pops group, and I'm going to point to group, and instantly now those are all one grouped object. Now, if I wanted to ungroup, I'd have to click the outside edge, right click, and ungroup, or group ungroup. And sometimes you need to edit it later. So that's something you want to do. Now, what's beautiful about this is all of these nodes or ovals or circles out at the bottom that don't have any arrows pointing in, those are the formula inputs. Everything else that has something flowing into it, that's going to be one of our formulas. So an influence diagram and math formulas. I'm going to come over to this part of our spreadsheet, and I'm going to highlight. And here's a great trick. You can go to View, Zoom to Selection, or the keyboard is Alt-WG, and instantly it zooms in. Now, this is our model, and I'm going to use these up here. I'm not going to copy and paste. I'm going to say equals. There's our first calculation. Notice that's a cell reference. If I change anything there, not only will that label update, but everything in our influence diagram will update also. Hey, I want to change this color, and so I'm going to use the mini toolbar, the fill, and more colors. This through all my classes, I'm using this green. Now, out there, when you're building models, I kind of like to have a green because then I know where the formulas are and where the cells without any format, like these and these formulas up here, I know that those are the formula inputs. However, if you're going to print them out or it's a professionally presented, then that green doesn't work. But I'm going to use it in this class because that way when we're learning, we're never going to make a mistake with a cell that has a formula. All right, so this is simple. I say equals. And I'm noticing that they're all next to each other. So I'm going to do sum. I should have used the keyboard Alt equals. MC, IC, and LC. And you know, I just noticed this. Check that out. The assigned indirect cost on our original sheet, it says $1.15, and I have it listed as $1.50 here. But you know what? That doesn't really matter. That's a formula input. We're making our formulas. Remember, that's the beauty of Excel. When I hit Enter, that's just a temporary answer. If I come up and change this to the correct amount, 1.15, and hit Enter, there we go. Now we can do our next formula equals the total variable cost. And we can see it's VC times Q. And notice there's our calculations right in our model area, right next to our formulas. No doubt here about how we're calculating this model. Hey, I'm going to say equals the VC we just calculated times the quantity. Now, if I had the potential of a rounding error, I'd use the round function here. But all of these inputs up here are given to the penny, so we're not going to have a rounding error. Enter, and there is our total variable cost. Now, actually, I think I have about 5 formulas. I'm going to do a little trick. Right-click on the cell, and on the mini toolbar, there it is, the Format Painter or Copy Format Only. When I click, my cursor changes to a paintbrush. I'm going to click and hold it. I haven't let go. 1, 3, 4, 5. So there we go. And let go of the click. Now our next formula is going to be total cost. So equal total costs and tab. It looks like FC plus the number we just calculated. So equals, and I go up to my assumption area. There's my fixed costs plus total variable cost, and enter. So there's our total costs. Total revenue is next, total revenue, and tab. Well, our revenue from up in our assumption area, there's that 1650 times, and I'm going to take our decision variable. Oh, and we need to take into consideration some defects. So equals open parentheses 1 minus, and there's our 2%. Close parentheses, and Control Enter. So 32,340. You can already see that since revenue is less than total cost, we are at a loss when we are only selling 2,000 units. Now we can calculate total profit, revenue minus expenses. Hey, I'm going to click here, equals, and get my total profit. And check that out. I originally up here wrote a plus and total cost plus. That's completely incorrect. But check this out. Remember, this is up in our assumptions area. And I'm going to control and roll. Because the formula right there, oh yeah, it's pointing towards the math formula area and our assumption area. And down here, this is also pointing here. So when I come here and edit this, highlight, and of course it's total revenue as a function of Q minus total cost as a function of Q, revenues minus expenses. That's the famous net income formula. Control Enter. Hey, it updates right here and over here. All right, I'm going to do that same trick. I'm going to highlight Alt-WG, increase the column width. That's what those little pound signs mean. All right, so you ready? Equals, oh no, revenue minus a bigger expense. Of course, that is going to be a loss. Hey, that is the whole point of this model. We have calculated our total profit. Because we set this up, assumption area with all of our formula inputs, our decision variable, we can change any of these. So if we think demand is not going to be 2,000 but 3,000, we can do what if analysis. Simply change our decision variable, Control Enter, and there we go, 2,220. So if we're happy with that profit, we can go ahead with this product. Control Z to change that. Now, if we thought it really was going to be at 2,000 and we thought a price increase wouldn't hurt, we might change this to 19.5. And instantly we see we have a profit. What we're doing is we're changing our formula inputs and seeing what if. Now I'm going to Control Z and leave those two inputs, because in our next two videos we'll see how to use goal seek to do what if analysis, and we'll see how to use data tables for amazing what if analysis. Now in this video, we learned the importance of building spreadsheets smartly. We saw a set of rules at the heart of which lies Excel's golden rule. If you have formula inputs that can change, you put them in cells and label them and refer to them in your formulas with cell references. We also saw how to build some math formulas, how to build our influence diagram, and how to build the start of our model. Now again, in our next couple of videos, we'll use this as our start, and we'll do goal seek, data tables, and some charting. All right, we'll see you next video.